Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragon's Jewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan. And I'm just going to get all those wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below. And if you like the content, please make sure you're hitting the like button on the videos. And of course, if you want to share some love down in the comments below, it's always greatly appreciated. And I absolutely love reading them. I do my best to make sure that I respond back and share some love in your direction as well, because naturally without you, this channel wouldn't exist. And I appreciate each and every one of you. And I thought I would bring some of those Halloween spooky vibes to the channel. There are going to be in the WIP and Chat style format, but I'm going to read some ghost stories of Alberta, which is the province that I reside in. So I will have a spooky canvas that I'll be working on, and then I'm going to read a couple of ghost stories so that you can listen along while you dab and paint, or work on another craft, or what you normally do during WIP and Chats kind of thing, and I keep you company with some spooky tales from my province. So I figured that would be fun. Strange Events in Clareview Condominium. Albert, a pseudonym, worked with Ron Hadley at the McKay Avenue School and was witness to the results of some ghostly parties. Considering the following tale, it is little wonder he asked to be transferred to another school. In 1983, Albert, a caretaker with the Edmonton School Board, moved his wife and two sons into a newly built condominium townhouse project at the eastern edge of Edmonton. Albert and his wife, Sharon, were a friendly, outgoing young couple who had no trouble making friends with their new neighbors. Summer evenings, after the children were safely tucked into bed, it was routine for 4 or 5 couples to sit outside in the complex courtyard, enjoying the pleasant weather and one another's company. All in all, the move to the new area seemed to have been a good one for Albert and his family. Even the location of the complex was special to the couple. The land on which this housing project had been built was once a farm owned by a distant relative of Sharon's. It gave them a feeling of family continuity. Sadly, the idyllic atmosphere was not so destined to last. The first person to realize the family was not alone in the townhouse was a visitor, Sharon's mother. She and Albert's 13-year-old son, Mick, were alone in the house. The boy was asleep in his bedroom. A blanket that had been on his bed unexpectedly showed up in the room his grandmother was using. The incident left the family shaken, but the story would likely have been forgotten if it hadn't been the first in a series of increasingly bizarre occurrences. I drove home from work one day and saw our living room drapes flying, opening and closing, the man recalled. Did it ever occur to him that an intruder may have been in his home, and that going in might be dangerous? No, he replied. I'd felt for a long time that there was some sort of spirit in the place. I was sure that was what was causing the drapes to move. As soon as I walked in, everything settled down. There was no one in the house at all. They assumed the ghost had been attracted to their particular unit because Sharon was a descendant of the original farmer. For that reason, in addition to the understandable embarrassment factor, the family said nothing to any of the neighbors about extraordinary happenings. Nothing, that is, until one fine summer evening, as often happened, a group of young parents had assembled with their lawn chairs in the central courtyard, chatting and drinking coffee. The discovery of a small object laying near where the group had congregated changed not only that meeting, but all of those which followed.
The object? An egg. A common chicken's egg. Nothing unusual except that Clareview, the subdivision where they lived, was well within the boundary of the city, and this was a farm egg, complete with brown shell. Stranger still, it had not been there when the group assembled, nor had anyone put it there. This brown egg merely appeared from out of nowhere, and nowhere in the present anyway. Not surprisingly, the egg caused quite a stir in the crowd. Conversations which had ranged from car engines to laundry detergent prices shifted suddenly to the unexplained happenings that many of the residents had experienced since moving into the complex. Electrical appliances would inexplicably cease to function. No reason for the malfunction could be found. In a few days, the incapacitated machine would be working as though nothing had ever been wrong with it. Televisions tuned to one channel would suddenly be broadcasting another station's programming. By comparing notes, these townhouse dwellers reached the conclusion that a spirit roamed through the development. Despite the ghost's general activity within the complex, Sharon and Albert's unit apparently was its favorite haunt. Was it because the ghost was an ancestor of Sharon's? No. According to the clairvoyant who Albert called in, the reason for the ghost's special interest in their home was son Mick's age. He had just entered puberty. Their tumultuous period is reportedly very attractive to those stranded between here and beyond. The spirit's activity centered around Mick, that assumption would have been safe for anyone to make. A particularly frightening occurrence involved the teens aged Mick and is, unfortunately, poorly documented. One night, as the family slept, Sharon awoke to the sounds in Mick's bedroom. Automatically performing an age-old motherly custom, the sleepy woman made her way to her son's bedside. Instead of settling a child frightened by a nightmare or uncomfortable from a stomachache, Sharon arrived to find her son there in body only. The ghost was speaking through my son, Albert explained. My wife tried to wake me but couldn't. This is very strange because I'm not a heavy sleeper. Even our younger son wouldn't wake up. It was like we were in some kind of trance. The terrified woman was left to deal with her temporarily possessed son. The deep trance-like sleep her husband and other son were in lasted as long as the possession, which ended as suddenly as it began. To this day, Mick has no recollection of his body's strange experience. He is well aware, though, that during that period, it was extremely difficult for him to keep track of his belongings. Things would be of little interest or value to anyone else would disappear frequently from his room. Then just as mysteriously they would appear in a few days. Pieces of jewelry and money were favorite objects for the spirit to borrow. Although it was annoying, Mick soon learned not to worry about something like a missing penknife. From experience, he knew it would be back where he'd left it within a few days. A family with lesser determination would likely have moved to the opposite end of the city. Albert, Sharon, Mick, and younger son Jonathan, however, decided to tackle the haunting head-on. They called in a psychic. He talked to the ghost. He told the restless spirit the family didn't mind the extraordinary presence as long as there were no further threats to anyone's well-being. Apparently, the invisible visitor agreed because his presence never again frightened anyone. This is not to say the ghost became an ideal roommate. Far from it. If you've heard the expression, the games people play, well, they're nothing compared to the games the Clareview ghost decided to play. My wife's purse disappeared once. We hunted high and low for things for several hours. We were the only ones home, and neither of us had been outside the house yet that day. After nearly 4 hours of searching, we accepted its loss and began phoning credit card companies to advise them that our cards may have been stolen. No sooner did we do that than the purse turned up smack in the middle of our bedroom. Each of us had scoured the entire room several times. If the purse had been there, we would have seen it. Albert and his family moved from the Clareview townhouse development in 1988, after sharing their lives for 5 years with the exceptionally friendly neighbors and a nuisance of a ghost. The former resident drove past the old place not too long ago. He was surprised to see a junior high school being built directly across the street from the complex. If the ghost had been especially attracted to their unit because of their son's age, one hesitates to think what hijinks might occur now. The school will ensure a constant supply of several hundred children in and around the age of puberty. McKay's Museum's lively spirits. Do you ever feel haunted by your job? Ron Hadley can certainly sympathize. He's the building preservations technician at McKay Avenue School, which now serves as the Edmonton Public Schools Museum and Archives. In the early 1980s, the once grand old school closed its doors to students. Shortly after that, restoration got underway. The site was an obvious one to become an historical treasure house. The first free public school in the Alberta district of the Northwest Territories was located there. Unbelievably, that clapboard structure has survived despite having served numerous functions since its construction in 1881. The building is back in its original condition and location, although now dwarfed by the museum and Edmonton's inevitable growth. The 1904 McKay Avenue School replaced that original schoolhouse, and the imposing red brick structure began to earn its own place in the political and educational history of Alberta. The first and second sittings of the Alberta legislature were held in the third floor Assembly Hall. Youngsters destined to make an impression on the world practiced their sums and pored over their readers in the classrooms. Hollywood star Leslie Nielsen, Supreme Court Justice Ronald Martland, the National Hockey League's Clarice Campbell, author Lotta Dempsey, and internationally acclaimed Air Force and bush pilot WIP May were all students at McKay. Given this colorful history, a few quirky stories surrounding the building might be expected. The incidents Ron has documented over the years, however, go well beyond quirky. The restoration seems to have caused a lot more activity than anyone could have predicted. There's definitely something going on in the building. Some mornings it looks like there's been a party. That comment was made by a former co-worker of Ron's, who has since sought more mundane employment. It was he who was working with Ron to set up the room for an early morning audio-visual presentation. They spent the last part of their day lining up chairs in neat rows, lowering window blinds, and as a precaution, even stapling them to the sills. As usual, Ron was the last to leave at night and the first to get to work in the morning. What he found the next morning would have sent a lesser man to the unemployment office. Chairs were knocked over and strewn around the room. Despite the staple, some blinds were up and others were right off the windows. We really had to rush in order to redo the room in time for the meeting, explained the unflappable Hadley. On other occasions, boilers had turned on or off, doors that were left locked were found unlocked. Pictures have been removed from the walls, and the school's security system has registered a rash of false readings. No wonder the other employees aren't keen on staying alone in the old building. These incidents, coupled with occasional strange tales from visiting alumni, prompted Ron to bring a Ouija board to work. Though bored, Peter was quick to identify himself. He maintains there are half a dozen spirits floating around the school. This didn't surprise Ron. The number and variety of occurrences had led him to assume he was dealing with more than one presence. Despite this, Peter's been the only one to communicate with Ron. What Peter lacks in visibility, he certainly makes up for in personality. He's told Ron quite a bit about himself. He was a laborer during construction in the 1912 four-classroom addition to McKay Avenue School. He claims to have been married and the father of 3 daughters, one of whom is still alive and resides in California. Peter reports that he was killed in a fall from the roof, and apparently his spirit has roamed the building ever since. He was steadfastly refused to reveal his last name, as laborers in 1912 would have little need to read or write. Peter might well have been illiterate and therefore unable to spell his name to Ron on the Ouija board. A pair of young psychics operating a business called Second Sight were called in. They confirmed there were a number of spirits residing in the building, but disappointingly, Peter did not identify himself to either of them. The psychic's visit was far from wasted, though. While standing in the school hall, the woman reported in an astonished voice, "Children are running up and down the side of the building. How can that be?" The ever-pragmatic Hadley pointed to the fire escape stairs on the exterior of the school. They would have been used frequently during routine fire drills. When another feeling stumped the young lady, "My jaw hurts in this room," was her comment at one point during the tour. Ron again came up with an explanation. The room she was in used to be the school's medical room, where visiting dentists examined and tended to students' dental problems. The most dramatic moment of the tour came when everyone involved realized that file cabinet drawers that were closed upon entering the room were now open. The room this occurred in is on the 2nd floor in the southwest corner of the building. On the 3rd floor, the psychics was again drawn to the southwest corner. This time, though, she was embarrassed to find herself in a recently renovated men's washroom. Could this possibly be the area Peter fell from? Likely no one will ever know, but that corner does overlook the 1881 schoolhouse. The small building was used as a storage shed for tools during the time Peter was working on the addition to the newer school. He would have been in and out of the old wooden building frequently. Ron is also required to be out at the one-room schoolhouse often. The man reports that sometimes when he goes out there, a wicked shiver will run through his body. That nostalgic little structure originally opened on January 3rd, 1882. Peter claims to have died on January 3rd, 1912. Ron Hadley was born on January 3rd, 1951. Quite a coincidence. Lobotomized laborer lives on in radio. Radio station CKUA is located in a building on Edmonton's main downtown thoroughfare, Jasper Avenue. To call the Alberta block nondescript would be a compliment. Few would call it anything short of downright ugly. The only interesting architectural feature is that it is not in fact just one building but 2. Constructed one behind the other and joined together as an afterthought. Inside the building, it is easy to tell by the odd shape of the corridors that there have been renovations. What the structure lacks in visual charm, it makes up for in interesting history. The block dates back to the early days of this century. It turned out as a flophouse. Although there have been many structural changes since those early days, remnants of the original use remain. For instance, some rooms still contain stove plugs and kitchen cupboards. The Alberta block also probably boasts a greater number of unused vaults per square foot than any other building in the province. Technician Larry King explained that because the premises were used by Alberta Safety Services during the Second World War disaster, evacuation plans were stored in vaults on the site. The Alberta Treasury Branch also had offices in the building, and they, of course, also required vaults. None has ever been removed. CKUA is not a mainstream commercial radio station. It originated as the University of Alberta station, continued as an educational service, and now broadcasts programs that focus on the arts. Each program has its own characteristics and following. As an employer, the station must be exceptionally good. Even in today's mobile job market, employees tend to stay on. 20 years seniority is not unusual for the staff there. One and possibly two former employees have stayed at their place of employment even after death. Credit for the building's haunted status most commonly goes to Sam, a former janitor. Even in life, he was a mysterious character. Sam started with the station in the mid-50s and remained employed there until his death in the 1970s. Bill Cool, a longtime radio station employee, an accomplished media person, remembers Sam clearly. He had quite the career in the East. I understand it was said that he'd been a member of the Stern Gang during the 1940s, and that his connections to the Middle East. He was also supposed to have a wife and lots of property in Toronto. Why would such a man be working as a janitor then? It seems Sam's lifestyle caught up with him when he threatened the life of the then Premier Ernest Manning. Perhaps because of his checkered past, the verbal attack was taken seriously. Seen as a menace to public safety, Sam was lobotomized. It was this docile shell of a human who swept the floors at CKUA. Sam's love of opera did not disappear from his brain's frontal lobe. He would spend a great deal of time in the station's enormous record library, poring over recordings of operas, and could frequently be heard singing arias. He was a strange person, explained Cool. He was very polite and quiet. I never saw him without a cigar or pipe in his mouth. He was a big guy, 6'4". He had a strange, blank look of a dullard. He never laughed, and when he did speak, it was with a slight accent. Most of the staff at CKUA had become aware of Sam's ghostly presence at one time or another. Some have heard his clear tenor voice on the other side of the library stacks when they were in that area. Others have experienced the distinct impression that someone was in the room with them when, as far as they could tell, they were actually by themselves. Bill has actually seen what may well be Sam's apparition. It was about 1 a.m. and I felt a presence. The lighting was dim, but when I looked up, I saw the reflection of a face on the control room glass. I could only clearly make out the eyes and a cigar. Larry King has been made well aware of the building's ghost. Never having seen the spirit, he does wonder if it's Sam who is responsible for the haunting. I've certainly experienced a ghost's presence, but I've always wondered if it was the former fellow technician. The man was from the same room I was. He trained at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology just a few years before I did, and then he came to work just ahead of me. Shortly after that, he died of leukemia. He was somewhat of a mentor to me, and as the spirits is an extremely helpful one, I thought at one time that it might have been him. Like all CKUA's employees, Larry would just as soon never go to the basement of the building. Unfortunately, most do have need to go there now and again. Also, like most of his colleagues, Larry frequently experiences the sensation that he is not alone. This feeling came frequently when he worked the graveyard shift. Quite often, I'd feel there was someone watching me, he acknowledged. One night, when a tape machine broke down, Larry had to carry it to the floor below for repairs. The machine was heavy and awkward, and Larry needed both his hands to manage the load. To add to his burden, the technician had the familiar impression that he was being watched. It gave me a prickly sensation, the shivers, he remembered. When Larry got to the bottom of the flight of stairs, he puzzled a moment over how to open the crash hardware door. With neither hand free, his options were limited. He turned around to give the bar a firm hip check. Just as he did, the door flew open, and the overloaded technician nearly fell into the hallway with the tape machine on top of him. Larry is convinced the spirit was not trying to cause an accident, but merely attempting to be helpful. Even so, it's easy to appreciate why the man is grateful he no longer has to work the graveyard shift. In the meantime, the ghost presence continues to be felt on occasion by most CKUA employees. Former fire hall spirits. The Edmonton Ambulance Authority has taken over several city fire halls. The arrangement was seen as a sensible one that would substantially reduce costs when the fire department relocated to larger premises. Unfortunately, not all the staff went along for the move. As a result, 2 Edmonton ambulance stations are haunted. Details of the hauntings vary, but acceptance of the tales is amazingly widespread. As a student paramedic, Deborah Tremblay was assigned to serve a night shift at number 5 station in Edmonton's East End. As she was drifting off to sleep, she heard footsteps echoing in the garage area and ambulance doors being slammed. The next morning, she mentioned this to the people she was working with. They were only surprised that she hadn't heard about the resident ghost through the grapevine. Scuttlebutt is divided on how the man died. The mundane version reports the firefighter passed away in his sleep during a night shift. A rather more exciting version says that he fell to his death from the back of a fire truck while responding to a call. What is certain is that the man's spirit hasn't left the building since. His activities are limited to patrolling the vehicle bays. Perhaps, like the ghost of Flight 401, the man is determined to keep those who've come after safe from harm. No one has ever reported seeing the apparition. The only prank he is ever credited to was to ring all the station's telephone when all lines were free. The person who bore the brunt of this antic was Sue Evans, an administrative employee of the Ambulance Authority. She had gone to the station specifically to check the phone lines. It would seem that neither the man's spirit nor his sense of humor died with him. The ghost of Ambulance Station 5 is a loafer compared with the spirit that lives in number 4. He, too, is a former firefighter, and although this building now belongs to Edmonton's ambulance service, the tales of hauntings go back to when it was a fire hall. The man with the most stories to tell in connection with Station 4 is still a firefighter with the Edmonton Fire Department. He agreed to be interviewed only on the promise of anonymity, and so the pseudonym Joe. During a night shift, Joe was assigned to the watch box, an area near the front of the building. 1 man per shift is designated to sleep there, and he is responsible for the overnight security of the fire hall. Joe was sleeping when he heard the huge garage doors go up. He woke in a near panic. Had he somehow slept through an alarm? No, the building was completely dark and quiet, but the doors stood open. Knowing what else to do, Joe closed the doors, checked the rest of the station thoroughly, and went back to bed. The next day he told his captain about the experience because he felt not to do so would be neglectful of his duties. Joe did ask his superior, though, to keep it confidential. If his co-workers heard about the incident, Joe knew he would be in for an unbearable amount of teasing. The next incident also occurred when Joe was in the watch box. This time something awakened him from a sound sleep. He felt tremendously uncomfortable and was convinced that something unusual had awakened him. He got up immediately and hurried to the dorm. All the men were in their beds, sleeping soundly. Just as he was about to leave the room, a door at the far end of the room swung open and then closed again. Joe felt chilled to the bone. Again he told his boss and again asked that the information go no further. Captain told Joe of a former firefighter who had died in the hall. Jake Smith was reputed to be a hardworking and well-respected member of the Edmonton Fire Department. Could this be who was disturbing Joe's sleep? Quite likely. Jake seemed to be the probable spirit. The only other time Jake made himself known to Joe was a summer afternoon. All the men were outside when Joe went back into the station. There he clearly heard a man's voice in an adjacent hallway and felt the now familiar feeling of extreme discomfort. No one else was inside the building. Not long after, the fire department moved to new quarters and work was done on the station to make it suitable for its new purpose, an ambulance station. During the renovations, Joe had occasion to drop into the hall. He chatted briefly with one of the workers about the progress being made. "I'm working as quickly as I can," the man told Joe. "The sooner I'm out of here, the better I'll like it. This place really gives me the creeps." Joe knew exactly what the man meant. Felicia Graham, where are you? Junior high schools can be frightening places. Edmonton's Westmount Junior High School has an extra reason. Her name is Felicia Graham, and the strikingly beautiful school marm has roamed the third floor halls of the stately old building for nearly 75 years. After obtaining a Master of Arts degree from the University College at the University of Toronto, 33-year-old Felicia left her parents' home and came west in 1918. She was assigned to teach English within what was then a radically new educational concept, a junior high school. By the end of September, Miss Graham was desperately unhappy. This was not an assignment she could ever enjoy, and a transfer to the more traditional Strathcona High School was arranged. Just days before the relocation was to take place, all of Edmonton's public schools were closed. A fatal flu epidemic swept through the province, leaving few families completely intact. While the outbreak ran its course, 3 Edmonton schools became makeshift hospitals, and women teachers were recruited as nurses. When the medical crisis was over, teachers and students were called back to classes. Felicia Graham didn't report for duty at either Westmount or Strathcona. In fact, Felicia Graham was never seen again. The young woman's parents were frantic. They offered an extremely generous reward for information leading to their daughter's whereabouts. They were convinced that their offer of $500 cash would procure promising results. Much to their disappointment, they kept the funds. No one has ever been able to say for sure what happened to the well-educated beauty from the East. Speculation, of course, was and is rampant. Was Felicia Graham also a victim of the flu epidemic? Was she unhappy enough with her teaching assignment that she just left the city without notifying anyone. Perhaps she was a victim of woman's old age dilemma, an unwanted, inconvenient, and extremely embarrassing pregnancy. That theory might also explain her continuing presence in the hall of Westmount Junior High School. Could the unborn child's father have been a colleague of Felicia's, and whose classroom was near the hallway her troubled spirit continues to roam?